Sermon part 2. Hopefully you were all here last week or have been reviewing my YouTube channel for last week's sermon. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a little reminder of the controversy that we were stirring last week. We were talking about the prayer for Medinat Yisrael, the prayer for the state of Israel, which Sarah Landerman recited for us today. And as I mentioned again today, it is my opinion that we should stick with the original text as penned back in 1948, which says that Israel is Reshit Tzmichat Ge'ulatenu, that Israel is the first blossoming of the flowering of our redemption, rather than Tehei Reshit Tzmichat Ge'ulatenu, that it would be a petition. Let it be the first blossoming of the flowering of our redemption. If you don't quite follow all of those points, go check out the recording. That's why they're there. But that's actually not the biggest controversy about this prayer. In fact, that's fairly low on the list. It's a passionate discussion in the modern context, but there is actually a much deeper, much more ancient context of whether this prayer can exist at all. Because you see, we don't pray on Shabbat. I know, you're sitting here going, wait a minute, we're in a sanctuary. We've been holding a Siddur in our lap all morning since 9:30, well, at least some of you, and it sounded an awful lot like prayers to me. And I'm afraid that is due to the poverty of the English language. You see, in English, we've basically got the word prayer. In Hebrew, we have many different gradations of prayer. There are 3 primary forms of prayer. There are prayers that are praise, there are prayers that are thanks, and then there are prayers that are petition. And if you take a look at page 291, I will walk you through the basic demarcations of these. That's in your Siddurim, yes, not the Chumashim, but the smaller of the red books, Lev Shalem. Page 291, as I tell people, it has almost everything in it you need for a full Siddur. It's just really hard to find because it wasn't laid out like a comprehensive Siddur. It would say Shabbat Siddur, but there are little snippets of weekday services as well, which is where we're going to have to look to get the full range of prayers that I'm talking about. So page 291 probably looks very familiar. Except that's not the melody that we use if it's a weekday. We're not going to go into the trope and nusach systems right now, but that prayer is not a prayer in the classical sense of Hebrew terminology. That prayer is actually praise. We are proclaiming the wonder and glory of God. Likewise, turn the page, 292. We get to the Givurot, again, one of the paradigmatic expressions of praise of God, about God's greatness across an entire range of human existence, literally life and death. And then, of course, to reach the true pinnacle, we turn to page 293, and we are in the Kedusha. You will notice it is a shorter version of Kedusha than the one we do on Shabbat or festivals. Everybody's with me so far, right? Excellent. One more page, 294. If you've never davened on a weekday service, you've never seen these words before in your life. It's a sad reality that I have come to terms with many, many years ago, that many people have not noticed that the service we do on Shabbat is explicitly, categorically, and meant to be noticed different than the service we do during the weekday. The service we do during the weekday, exactly. The Shabbat service and the weekday service are the same for the first 3 prayers. They're also same for the last 3 prayers. But in the middle, there is a massive shift. On Shabbat, we have one blessing. And we say, wow, it's amazing that God made Shabbat. That's it. It's a little longer than that, don't get me wrong, but that is the gist of that blessing. On the weekday services, which we do morning, afternoon, and evening, this happens to be the afternoon selection, we do 13 prayers during that part of the Amidah, that part of the prayer. And they are all petitionary. They are all requests. Take a look at the ones that are just here on page 294. We are asking for knowledge. We are asking for the ability to repent. We are asking for forgiveness. We are asking for redemption. And the next few pages, you'll see, continue in that vein. 13 different explicit petitions that we don't do on Shabbat. Now, do we not need knowledge on Shabbat? Do we not need redemption, or, as you'll see later on, prosperity, health, healing? Do we not need these things on Shabbat? Well, why are we not including these petitions on Shabbat? Some of you may actually be feeling, you know what, Rabbi, I'd like to be praying some of these, because sometimes I come to Shabbat with a feeling of desperate need, and I want to pour out my heart. Perhaps even in your own private reflections, you have been doing so, adding in your own petitions to God on Shabbat. But our tradition says no. Any ideas why we would jettison these 13 beautiful petitions that arrange a hierarchy of things that we should be focused on, of wanting in life, which during the week are incredibly good for grounding you, of turning towards what is actually worth seeking, as opposed to the usual vanities that we pour ourselves after. But on Shabbat, why not? Any suggestions? Were the ancient rabbis just crazy? All right, so if you're asking God for something, then that means you want something different. You want something to be changed. You would like God if I am feeling like the year has not been good enough for my crops, one of the primary themes of the prosperity blessing, I'm asking that God fix that. And, chop, chop, get to work, make my plants grow faster, make the sun shine brighter, maybe not too bright with global warming, make the rains come better. I'm asking for a change.
Shabbat is a time during which we give back to Hashem every sort of action and thing that we want to do. We have free will, so we must sort of send that up to heaven, and we must say, okay, I'm going to allow reality to be that way. So by withholding from certain actions, and then we take that action, the way we're giving to it.
So in a way, we're giving to God by, if I can summarize what you were saying, by resting, by coming to rest. But it's not the rest of lethargy or apathy. It is the rest of appreciation. That on Shabbat, we actually say, look, I know 6 days of the week, I am out there sword and shield fighting for my family, fighting for myself, fighting for my community, my country, whatever it may be that I am focused on. I am building houses, I am cleaning up the gutters, I am there in the accounting office making those numbers add up. I am out there working, because without that, this world is going in a handbasket, or at least my own life is doing so. But on Shabbat, our tradition tells us, stop. Stop. Not stop because you just need to catch your breath. It's not stop because if you rest, you'll be more productive next week. That's the unfortunate lie of the weekend that got sold in order to finally make it American law. But instead, it's telling you to stop because you don't have to. For this day at least, fundamentally change your perspective of life, and for this moment, act like the world doesn't need you. The world doesn't need you to change it. That as a matter of fact, I'm still taking in lungfuls of air. My pulse is still there. I am here with a roof over my head. I have people around me that I care about and who care about me. You know what? If I were to continue to work today, as I do from Sunday through Friday, it would be as though I were saying, this doesn't count. This isn't good enough. I want more. So on Shabbat, we do not petition. On Shabbat, we accept the world as the beautiful gift that it is. We accept our lives as the beautiful gifts that they are. Now, that is wonderful, loving, and heartwarming, but there is, of course, more to it, because as I said, we have a controversy with regards to the blessing for the state of Israel. And what would that controversy be now that we've reflected on the nature of petitionary prayer on Shabbat? How can we pray for the well-being of Israel on Shabbat? How do we break the taboo of making a request for Israel? Indeed, says our tradition, how do we break that taboo for anything? I know there are many things that we all consider very commonplace. We have a mishaberach lacholim. We have a prayer for those in need of healing. We have prayers for our country. We have prayers for Israel. There are petitions everywhere on our Shabbat service, aren't there? So, Rabbi, are you smoking something? Have you not noticed that we have petitions across our Sidurim on Shabbat? Well, we do and we don't. So we got to untangle this, because if you untangle it, you will appreciate it more. And if you appreciate it more, well, then hopefully it will mean even more than it currently does. So first of all, let's go back to an example from the Talmud of the nature of the wall against petitions. There is a statement in the Talmud and Ta'anit, in the section about fasting, which has much to say about how we make petitions. Fasting in the ancient world was one of the most severe forms of making a petition for the world to be different. And they said, there is no crying out on Shabbat, no petition on Shabbat, except if there is an army besieging your city, a river that is currently flooding, or you are in the midst of an immediate catastrophe, what we call in American Jewish jurisprudence a clear and present danger. But that's it. That's the only thing that you can pray about on Shabbat. And then immediately Rabbi Yossi steps forward and says, actually you can't even pray about that. All you can do is cry. You can't pray. You can't say, please God, fix this. God, there's an army outside the walls of my city. Please defend us. No, says Rabbi Yossi. Even with an army at the gates, you cannot say, please God, do this. All you can do is say, woe. All you can do is lament. All you can do is cry. Now, this is a hard line stance. And as you probably know, in many places in the Talmud, the hard line stance is not the one that becomes normative Jewish law. And yet, when we turn to Rambam, the codifier of Jewish law in the 11th century, he kind of takes Rabbi Yossi's position, that indeed there is no praying on behalf of anything on Shabbat unless there is an immediate danger. In fact, even that was not considered normative. There were many voices all the way up until the 1400s that said, even for your friend who is currently dying of an illness, you are not allowed to pray on their behalf on Shabbat. That was how high the wall against transgressing the petitionary prayer prohibition on Shabbat was. That even if somebody was dying, you can't pray for them. Pretty severe, eh? Okay, but we did a Misher Barak Lacholim. Am I violating Jewish law? Is the Sidur violating Jewish law? After all, I didn't edit it. I would have made things a little different if I had, but no. Because around that time, in the Middle Ages, our Jewish scholars put together their heads and said, well, yes, it's true, we don't make petitions on Shabbat if they are personal petitions. But for the needs of the tzibur, for the needs of the community, that we can. And so we bundle our fears, we bundle our petitions. So no, individually I will not stand in prayer and say, please heal Mr. So-and-so who is currently going through a life-threatening illness. But collectively, if we happen to be saying, God, there are people that are ill in your world, we can add some examples, such as Mr. So-and-so. So that is why, if you'll notice, when we do the Misha Berach Lacholim, we don't just say one person. We don't even say just the people that we have mentioned. We say, and all of those that are ill. We transform it from a personal petitionary prayer, which, again, during the week is where we are normally situated in our relationship to God for too often, of asking, and instead we say, I'm not asking for myself, I'm not even asking just for the person that matters to me. When I share a name, I am adding them, and thus I am also including in my own thoughts the rest of the names that are being mentioned. Which is why, of course, after you have added a name to the list, you better shut up and listen to the other people being added as well. Otherwise, it is selfish. And likewise, even if you do not have a name on that list, recognize that that list is being generated precisely because it is only for the needs of the community that we are willing to step across that line and make a petition on Shabbat. Which is why that section of the service is fraught with potential theological implications. Now, we do try to go across that. We do say Shabbat hi milazok, which if you will notice never actually gets translated, although I will commend the editors. If you look up the translation of the Mishaberach Lacholim, literally in the Lev Shalem, they did get this right. It says, even though Shabbat is a time where we refrain from crying out, sorry, Rabbi Yossi, nonetheless, for the community, we are going to cry out. And I'm going to add in some specific examples from the community that is in need. So, if somebody is ill, yes, you can petition on Shabbat if you are willing to join together with the community to petition for the needs of the community, which your friend or loved one is one representative, one member of that community. Everybody following the logic here? Good. Because I got to walk it back a little bit to make sure you don't think the ancient rabbis were animals. Because I know that that's a potential impression. Oh, good. Modern Judaism, we finally have established that it's okay to petition with this kind of loophole in order to have healing or to have God's blessings for the state of Israel as it goes through the horrible situation it's in, or any of the other major issues that we mentioned. But we're still left thinking that maybe 2,000 years ago our rabbis went, so Mr. So-and-so is dying over there. I'm not going to break my Shabbat to even say a word on his behalf. Yes?
Rabbi, was there ever an argument that was made in line with what you're saying that this is related to how sort of holiness ascends? And then the first thing that was made holy was the Shabbat, and then it was the people, and then it was the Mishkan. And so if we guide our services by the Mishkan, then we request for the whole community, which is actually an extension of holiness.
It's an interesting way of putting it, that by using the Mishkan as a focus of the community, it moves us out from our individual and potentially, and not always bad, selfish petitions. Remember, 6 days of the week, 3 times a day, we get to put our selfish petitions right up at the top, although we still couch them in general language. But our own private prayers are perfectly acceptable, no matter how petitionary and no matter how selfish they may be. Although we do try to remind ourselves during the prayer of Be'ana Rachetz that it is only the worthy petitions of our heart that we'd like God to pay attention to, and not sometimes the things we might feel or say that are unworthy. But let's talk about those ancient rabbis. Were they really so heartless? Well, no. Because they understood something. That while it is true, we do not contaminate our psychology of prayer with petitions on Shabbat, you do get up out of your chair and you go help the person. They use the example of a storm that is tossing a ship at sea. Now, it's Shabbat. We are not allowed, says Rabbi Yossi, and many others who agree, to pray on behalf of that ship which is struggling to make its way back into harbor during the storm on Shabbat. But you know what you can do? You can go light a signal fire so they can see where the harbor is, even though that is a direct violation of Shabbat. You can tie together ropes to try and throw it out to them to get it. You can, if you are in a safe vessel, go out and rescue them in a lifeboat situation. You may not be able to pray on Shabbat, but you can act on Shabbat when there is a desperate need to save a life. Weird, huh? I can't pray, but I can do. And how often have we reversed that in the modern world? Oh, I can't do anything, but I'll pray. My thoughts and prayers about this tragedy, about this situation, about what's going on. What can I do? I'm not going to do anything. That would be interfering. But praying, I'll do. On Shabbat, we flip that model in Judaism, and that's what our ancients understood, which is why for them saying we're not going to pray made a lot of sense. Because if it is something that is necessary for prayer, then what are you doing sitting in shul? Get out there and help the boat. Go man the walls of the city. Why are you sitting here praying if there is a desperate situation? If someone is ill, go light a fire so they don't freeze to death while they're sick. Boil them and cook some chicken soup for them if that's what's going to be what's necessary. On Shabbat, pikuach nefesh, doche et hakol, it supersedes everything. Go out and do. Prayer is not the answer in those desperate situations. In fact, on Shabbat, prayer is prohibited, but your actions are not. Your actions are not.
Well, in my opinion, I think it's because Hashem is all about action instead of words.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. God is definitely likes action, but God does consider words to be actions as well under most circumstances. But we do want to maintain this barrier on Shabbat. Shabbat needs to be this sacred place and time, the island time, as Rabbi Heschel called it. But that doesn't mean that it is a refuge from action. Yes, we do want to shape our minds on Shabbat so that they are not focused on our selfish or personal requests. That if we are going to make a request, we will join it together to our community, that we will come together like this. We want to have that specialness of Shabbat. But we don't want to think that that's the opposite of helping. We need to recognize that when help is needed, you get up and you go help. Even if it means violating Shabbat in every other way. If there is a fire, a catastrophe, a need, we help on Shabbat. But we still don't pray. So the prayer is still moving you more towards yourself than towards the target of your help and towards the beauty of that day. I thought I saw a tentative hand. Yes. It was indeed God who rested on Shabbat. Indeed, less demanding on God, who doesn't actually have a limit to what he could do, but precisely for the second half of what you said, and thus less demanding on ourselves. That for the mundane of life, on Shabbat we learn, you know what? A day off. If God can take a day off and the world keeps spinning, I can take a day off and the world will keep spinning. And for too many of us, we miss that message. And then for those who get that message, they think, and thus I can not be bothered to help. Now, I'm not saying that most of us are in life and death situations on the average Shabbat. But during the rest of the week, this still applies as well. Even for those of us who have the practice of praying from our traditional liturgy with all of the petitionary prayers, it is no substitute. Again, in the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel, prayer is not a panacea. It does not replace the need for action. It fills in the gap sometimes in places where we cannot act. It helps guide us in the direction of how we should act. But we still need to act, even during the week when we make our petitions. Prayer and action are meant to go together, and our reluctance to pray in petitionary ways on Shabbat is meant to guide us to higher action both on Shabbat and on the weekdays as well. Last comment, otherwise we'll be here forever because there's so much more to say. Like I said, this is part 2.
So many people don't react to situations, but they use their cameras or their phones to record situations. They don't leap into action.
Yes, in the hierarchy of reactions, posting to social media is pretty much near the bottom. Oh, look, there's a fire. Well, I can pray about it. I can go and try to help the people or call the fire department, whatever the situation warrants, or I can whip out my phone, record it, and try and get some social media credit for this. Yeah, that's right down there near the bottom. Absolutely. And indeed, while it's certainly fine to publicize things that need publicity, there needs to be other forms of action in attendance. Otherwise, publicity yields nothing. Like I said, we can continue this forever. For now, I will simply say, Shabbat Shalom. Find that peace of Shabbat. Find that rest on Shabbat for your soul. For the rest of the week, petition, act, and move. And even on Shabbat, when the need is there, do what is needed. Shabbat Shalom.